Hello, my name is Ellie Johnson. I'm the Outreach Forester for Michigan Forest Association, and this is Natural Selection, Species to Site Selection. And it is the third of a five-part series for the Neighbor Network. So thank you for being here watching this video and considering being a neighbor. As a reminder, who is Michigan Forest Association? Well, we're a nonprofit whose mission is to inspire and empower people to sustainably manage, conserve, and enjoy forests through education, advocacy, and fellowship. This video is serving as that education piece, and volunteering to be a neighbor is definitely serving that fellowship piece. So again, thank you for being here. Further reminders, what is the Neighbor Network? We are aiming to connect private landowners with other private landowners to help complete each other's forest management projects, especially focusing on tree plantings or reforestation efforts. So in this video, we're talking about selecting species and selecting the site for doing a planting. And in order to do that, you need to understand your local ecology. We are not landscaping here or doing any type of agriculture. We're creating an ecosystem, right? Trees are the infrastructure for habitat, especially in the state of Michigan. So it is so much more important to understand what you have, what your local environmental conditions are like, and match the species to the site conditions that are there versus manipulating the site conditions to cater to any one species. Okay, so the first and arguably the bulk of this talk is going to be about sunlight and your local hydrology or available soil moisture. Both of those things can be directly tied to topography and aspects and different soil characteristics. So the terrain of your parcel, if it's hilly and depending on the cardinal direction of those hills, it's going to influence the solar radiation hitting one part of your area, which in turn will impact, obviously, the light getting to the ground and getting to those seedlings, and also the water that's available in that soil. So just a note, we'll talk about that here in a bit, as well as the rest of that list. But also with a huge disclaimer at the beginning is some of the things in this talk, if not a lot of it, is going to be a lot of generalities. Trees exist in a range of environments. The picture to the left is a sandy, well-draining, low-nutrient site that's got some red maples mixed into that tree line. The picture to the right has red maples growing right up to the edge of, if not right out of, a body of water. So yes, the major limiting factors of a tree getting established in one place is water and sunlight. And I'm going to give some recommendations of what species can handle what types of conditions, but also just note that like trees can't read. They're not following by the book all the time. Plants have very complicated genetics. They have more genetic material than we do, and it's because they can't walk away from their problems, right? So they can withstand variations or short-term periods of stress in the environment that they're in. So what I'm telling you is like, these are ideal conditions for these different native to Michigan tree species with full acknowledgement that they can be found in and even thriving in other types of environments. So let's talk about sunlight, right? If we're talking about sunlight, we're talking about shade tolerance. So the leaves of a tree, the needles, whatever, they are organs who are responsible for creating the food, and that food is created by sunlight, right? All plants are going to need some sunlight to survive. And because it's living tissue, though, you could try to give any one leaf as much sunlight as possible. It's still going to have a max capacity of overall production, right? And so that's what these graphs or the idea of shade tolerance is talking about. That different species can withstand less than optimal conditions and still meet their full productivity potential. So if you look at like these top two, I believe in this, you'll be able to see my cursor. So in these top two graphs, you see sugar maples, they can handle lower amounts of sunlight and still hit their full productivity potential. However, something like Prunus serratina, a black cherry, it needs a lot of full sunlight conditions to be able to photosynthesize at its peak level, which in turn, obviously the energy is for maintaining and having a body, but all that energy is also for warding off insects. It's for producing flowers and fruits and reproductive processes, right? So very important to consider if not only is a tree going to survive here, but is it going to be able to do all those other things. So again, think of this, to give some visuals to this. To the left is this carpet of sugar maples hanging out in that really shady understory, waiting for something in the canopy to finally get blown over or cut down or whatever, free up some sunlight to move up into it. They can persist at this kind of level for numerous growing seasons. Obviously, it's not optimal conditions, but they are still alive, right? Versus if you've walked through the woods, especially up here at near the 45th parallel in northern lower Michigan, you see some really scraggly black cherry trees. Those are not very shade tolerant. They are not photosynthesizing very well underneath the shade of other things. And so you'll often see them, at least up in the woods where I'm walking around, crawling towards and reaching towards the light. So they definitely look like octopus tentacles, trying to get directly into a sunbeam. But important to note, especially with seedlings, that shade isn't always a bad guy. Water stress is definitely one of the major factors for having a tree planting fail, because you're buying from the conservation districts, especially you're buying these bare root seedlings. So especially if you're planting following a harvest, or you've got a forest that had a lot of ash trees in it, or something that you've got now a lot of canopy gaps of things that have been removed or they have died, those canopy gaps may be able to work to your advantage by creating these microclimates where it's a bit shadier, there's going to be more moisture in the soil. But also to note, something to think of when you're looking down at a canopy gap. In general, as we were talking about earlier with like terrain and the aspect of a hill can influence the environmental conditions of that space. A southern facing hillside is getting more sun and it's going to be a drier space, right? But the southern edge of a canopy gap is actually going to be more shady because it's going to be shaded out by the canopy of established trees on the edge of that canopy gap. So depending on the species that you are buying for your reforestation project that maybe is among this forested space that you're purposely planting in these canopy gaps, things that want more full sun conditions should actually be in the northern part of a canopy gap in your forest matrix, and things that definitely need to have more reliable water available in the soil should be planted on the southern edge. And if you wanted to pause right here, between different things that I've read and over the years of working as a district forester, this is a list that I've come up with on species tolerance, from being very tolerant, so like American beech trees, hemlocks, balsam firs, sugar maples, those can hang out underneath the shades of other established trees. They don't want to necessarily spend their whole life there, but they can handle some shade. Versus things that need full sun conditions is definitely your black cherry, your red pine, your black walnuts, paper birch, black and white ash, your aspens, black willows, jack pines, tamaracks. So those are all things that want a lot of sunlight to get started. If you plant any seedlings, and I guess I should have brought this up with the canopy gap one, our hemlock trees are some of our most shade tolerant trees, and in turn they create the most true shade. And so even if something is tolerant of shade, you really don't want to play around with planting young bare root seedling stock directly underneath hemlock groves. They're going to definitely get shaded out and will not be able to establish. Okay, let's talk about, it's important to know your soils, because soils are going to influence the water that's available in any one space. There are 3 different soil texture types. There's sand, silt, and clay. Sand it's the largest soil type as far as like particle size. You can hold it in your hand and see the individual particles, right? Larger particles mean that you have larger pockets, within those particles. And so water more readily drains through a sandy soil type. Versus a clay soil, much smaller particles, much smaller pockets, so water is more readily trapped within that soil medium. And of course, those three textures create so many different soil types out in the landscape that various ratios of those mix together. And as a reminder for Michigan landscapes, a lot of our geology was influenced by glaciers. And so it's important to know this piece of what you own, how it was produced, the terrain of your space and the soils in that, to understand where your water goes and how it's stored. So then you can have a better understanding of what trees can survive in different areas of your property. So again, this is just like to give you a bit of a visual in thinking of like the terrain and the soil types of an area. But you're going to find much different species in dry, sandy upland sites than you are down in like mesic or wetter, loamy bottomlands on the toe slopes, which will also be slightly different forest compositions to your very wet, like regularly standing water throughout the year, clay, like bogged down soils, right? So again, this might be another screen to pause on. None of these lists that I'm giving are complete lists. Also, for full context, I live up in the Traverse City area. These are species that I come across a lot and the general environments that they survive in. But just something to think about between both of these ideas of what species need full sunlight, what species need drier conditions, what ones like having their feet wet, and better understand the forest property that you own, where you're thinking of doing this tree planting, and what species might make sense for your space. To illustrate this even further, because again, I live outside of Traverse City, but the concept of the neighbor network could benefit communities across Michigan. But the map to the left is a map of soils throughout Michigan. So there's a lot of sandy types up where I'm at, so with like Leelanau County with that like light tan, and then throughout the middle of the state. And with these lighter purples and the light green especially, you get some more loam and clay into the soils, different wetland types. The soil types directly correlate to what forests are able to exist in those different spaces. And that comes back to the idea of what is the available soil moisture in any one location. But as you know, we as human beings have altered our environment a lot over the last few generations. And so showing you these statewide maps of like, here is how forest types are influenced by the soil of any one space, it should be noted that like your specific 10, 20, 40, 100 acre parcel may look a little different based on the other biotic influences, like human changes to the landscape and to the forest type that's currently there. Doesn't necessarily mean you need to plant and mimic what's currently happening in your space. It is valuable to look back at historic species lists of what could be in your area, but just wanted to note. You can learn more about your soils by literally walking outside and digging a hole, but also to get some like further context on your space. There are a lot of resources online for you to explore maps of your area. And one about soils specifically is the USGS soil survey maps. This one happens to be a screenshot of the Glen Lake area. But yeah, have some boots on, walk through your space, see where your boots get wet, right? See what your property is like throughout the calendar year, where water settles and pools in the spring during snow melt. And to get even like a deeper dive, you can submit soil samples to MSU Extension, and they could provide some extra information about that. Not only like the makeup of the textures in your soil, but also like the different nutrients that your soil has or may be lacking. Other things to consider when you are planting trees is literally the physical available space that you have to work with. So considering your structures, your home, your above head power lines, any below ground cables, the other species that are there, stuff that's established, maybe things that are threats like invasive species, they might need to actually clear out and some type of site prep. And in general, just like other wildlife that might be in here, right? So when you're curating your species list to prepare for a reforestation project, you're going to want to consider all these things. Something that can help with the physical space, this screenshot is from the U.S. Forest Service does these tree owner manuals. They update them every 5 years, I think. And so this gives some like nice guidelines of like at least 30 feet from, or 25 feet from wires, at least 15 feet between trees. Again, there's a lot of generalities here. It depends on so many things like what you're planting, the size of your structure, the height of the power lines, all sorts of stuff, right? But good things to know. And to get a better understanding of what's underground that you can't see, you should definitely, if you're putting 25, 50, 100, 250 seedlings in the ground that are eventually going to be adult trees, you want to make sure that you're not putting it on top of something that's important. So when you're planning a tree planting, call Mystic, get a better handle on the overall like physical limitations of the space you're thinking of planting in before you break out the shovel. Of course, something to think on then as you're selecting species is the health concerns for different species. So are you in an area where hemlock woolly adelgid is present? Maybe you don't want to have hemlocks as a large portion of your tree planting. Or Asian longhorn beetle, the bottom right there, they're not in Michigan yet, but they really love maples. And so we're part of a global economy. There are a number of different pests that unfortunately have made their way over to the States that have killed a lot of trees. Emerald ash borer up there is a good example of that here in Michigan. So when you are considering what you are planting or how you're conducting your tree planting, think of the idea of a diverse forest as a more resilient forest. The more species that you've got in a space that are native to that space, and with all those individual trees with their own complicated genetics and stuff, they collectively are going to be able to withstand so many different pressures, both biotic and climatic, and just things that we don't know that could be coming. Having that diversity in your tree planting is going to make that tree planting successful long term. And again, as we said earlier, it is so much easier to match a species to the site conditions that you happen to own than it is to manipulate those conditions to match a species that you want. So understand your local ecology. Think of the biodiversity of where you are in the state of Michigan and have fun with it. Because again, why are we planting trees? Well, they do a lot of things for us. They are filtering our water, they're cleaning our air, they're improving our mental health, and they're creating so much habitat and spaces to live and support for all the rest of the organisms that are existing in the state of Michigan. Thank you for watching. So this was the third video of a 5-part series for the Michigan Forest Association Neighbor Network. Thank you again for being a neighbor, and I will see you in the fourth video.